The tractor gave out at dawn, and Robert Sullivan knew his family's 100-year legacy would die with it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The massive John Deere 4440 sat silent in the middle of 40 acres of unplanted corn ground, its engine seized after 3 decades of faithful service on the Sullivan family farm in Dawson County, Nebraska. The machine represented more than transportation or equipment. It was the last functioning piece of machinery Robert owned outright, the final tool standing between his family's survival and the bank foreclosure notice that had arrived 6 days earlier, giving him until September 30th to produce $60,000 or surrender the land his great-grandfather had homesteaded in 1924. Robert stood beside the dead tractor as morning light spread across fields that should have been planted 3 weeks ago, watching the narrow window for successful corn planting, close with each passing day, while his financial situation spiraled beyond recovery. At 42 years old, he had spent his entire life working this land, following the path his father and grandfather had walked before him, believing that hard work and dedication would preserve the family legacy that had survived the Dust Bowl, the Depression, and every agricultural crisis of the past century. That faith seemed desperately naive now, as he faced the mathematical certainty that his generation would be the one to lose everything his ancestors had built through generations of sacrifice and relentless determination. The farm equipment dealership in town had quoted him $18,000 for a replacement tractor with financing that required collateral he no longer possessed, while the local mechanic had examined the seized engine and delivered the final verdict that repair costs would exceed $12,000 with no guarantee of success. Robert's checking account held $473. His credit cards were maxed at their limits, and his last conversation with the bank had made clear that no additional lending would be considered for an operation that was already 3 months behind on existing loan payments. His wife Sarah had stopped asking about solutions 2 weeks ago, her silence more devastating than any argument, as she took extra shifts at the county hospital where she worked as a nurse, trying to generate income that might delay the inevitable, while their 2 children remained blissfully unaware that their childhood home was circling the drain of financial ruin. Robert's father had died 4 years earlier, spared the knowledge that his son would be the one to destroy the family legacy, while his mother lived in the small house near the main road. Her dementia advanced enough that she no longer recognized the crisis, threatening everything her husband had spent 50 years protecting and preserving. The land itself seemed to mock Robert's failure with its rich black soil and perfect drainage, the kind of agricultural ground that produced exceptional yields in competent hands, but which would be sold to corporate agricultural operations that would strip mine its productivity without any connection to the generations of careful stewardship that had built and maintained its fertility. The main farmhouse where Robert had been born sat 200 yards from the disabled tractor, its white paint peeling and porch sagging, physical evidence of years when maintenance budgets had been sacrificed to keep the farming operation running through commodity price collapses and input cost increases that had systematically destroyed mid-sized family farms throughout the Midwest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Robert's farming operation had been bleeding money for 3 consecutive years, victim to a perfect storm of low commodity prices, rising equipment costs, and weather patterns that had shifted just enough to reduce yields below profitability, while corporate agricultural operations with access to unlimited capital and sophisticated hedging strategies continued expanding their dominance throughout the region. The bank that held his mortgage had been patient through 2 previous restructuring attempts, but their corporate headquarters in Omaha had finally issued the ultimatum that local relationship banking could no longer override mathematical reality and fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. The sound of footsteps on gravel pulled Robert from his spiral of despair as he turned to see a figure approaching from the county road that bordered his property's eastern edge. The man walking toward him appeared to be in his 60s, wearing clothes that had seen better days, carrying a worn military surplus backpack and moving with the kind of steady, purposeful gait that suggested long experience with extended travel on foot. Robert's first instinct was suspicion, as rural Nebraska had seen increasing numbers of transient individuals passing through as economic hardship spread beyond urban areas into agricultural communities that had once seemed insulated from broader economic problems. The stranger stopped 20 feet from the disabled tractor, his weathered face revealing decades of outdoor exposure, while his eyes assessed the mechanical situation with obvious technical understanding that went far beyond casual observation. Robert noticed the way the man's gaze moved systematically across the tractor's engine compartment, examining specific components with the focused attention of someone who possessed genuine mechanical expertise rather than simple curiosity about a broken machine. "Seized engine," the stranger observed, his voice carrying the flat, neutral tone of someone accustomed to delivering technical assessments without emotional elaboration. "Probably threw a rod through the block based on the oil pattern on the ground beneath the crankcase. You were running her pretty hard when she let go." Robert felt defensive irritation at having his farming practices judged by a homeless drifter, but the accuracy of the technical diagnosis was impossible to dismiss. "I was trying to make up for lost time," he replied, hearing the exhaustion in his own voice. "Planted late because of equipment breakdowns on the other tractors. Pushed this one too hard trying to compensate. Now I've got nothing." The stranger moved closer to the tractor, his hands moving over the engine components with practiced familiarity that suggested extensive mechanical training and experience far beyond shade tree repairs or basic maintenance. "You've got a 466 cubic inch engine with a cracked block and damaged pistons," he said quietly, "but your transmission, hydraulics and electrical systems are all solid. Your problem isn't the whole machine. It's one catastrophic failure in an otherwise functional piece of equipment." "Doesn't matter," Robert replied bitterly. "I can't afford to repair it, can't afford to replace it, and without it I can't plant the corn that might generate enough revenue to save this farm from foreclosure. The bank wants $60,000 by the end of the month, or they take everything my family has built over 4 generations. The stranger straightened from his examination of the engine, his eyes meeting Robert's with an intensity that suggested he understood far more about the situation than a casual observer should comprehend. "I spent 23 years as a combat engineer in the Army," he said quietly. "Specialized in field repairs under conditions where failure meant people died and success meant improvising solutions with whatever materials were available. I've rebuilt diesel engines in the middle of Iraqi deserts, fabricated replacement parts from salvaged equipment in Afghan mountains, and kept critical machinery operational when every technical manual said it was impossible." Robert stared at the homeless veteran, trying to reconcile the man's shabby appearance with the confident technical expertise he was claiming, wondering if this was some kind of con or genuine offer of assistance from someone who understood mechanical systems at a level that exceeded conventional repair capabilities. "Even if you could fix it," Robert said slowly, "I can't pay you anything. I've got less than $500 to my name and debts that would take a decade to clear if I had any income at all." "I don't want your money," the stranger replied. "I want a meal, a place to sleep tonight out of the weather, and the satisfaction of knowing I helped preserve something worth saving. Your family has been farming this land for 100 years. That means something, even if the banks and corporate operations don't value it. That represents stability, continuity, and connection to the land that built this country's agricultural foundation." The offer seemed too good to be true, triggering Robert's skepticism about strangers bearing gifts, but the desperate mathematics of his situation left few alternatives worth considering. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "James." "James Mitchell," the veteran replied, extending a weathered hand that bore scars, suggesting extensive mechanical work and possible combat injuries. "And before you ask, yes, I'm homeless. Yes, I've been traveling through Nebraska looking for work. And yes, I understand that makes me suspicious to people who have things worth protecting. But I'm also telling you the truth about my mechanical capabilities, and I'm offering you the only chance you're probably going to get to save your family's farm." Robert shook the offered hand, feeling calluses that matched his own, the kind of rough skin that came from decades of manual labor and mechanical work that destroyed soft tissue and built layers of protective hardening. "Robert Sullivan," he replied. "This is the Sullivan family farm, or what's left of it after I've spent 3 years driving it into bankruptcy through a combination of bad luck, worse timing, and decisions that seemed reasonable at the time but turned out to be catastrophic." "Stop beating yourself up," James said firmly. "I've seen the agricultural economics data. Mid-sized family farms are being systematically eliminated by market forces that favor corporate consolidation and economies of scale that individual operators can't match. You're not failing because you're incompetent. You're failing because the entire economic system is designed to transfer agricultural land from family ownership to corporate control." The blunt assessment of structural problems beyond his individual control should have been comforting, but Robert found it difficult to separate personal responsibility from systemic failure when the consequences would destroy everything his ancestors had preserved through their own periods of agricultural crisis and economic hardship. "My great-grandfather homesteaded this land in 1924, he said quietly. "Survived the Dust Bowl by adapting his farming practices and refusing to abandon the ground even when half his neighbors gave up and moved to California. My grandfather expanded the operation after World War II, bought the neighboring quarter section and invested in modern equipment that tripled productivity. My father weathered the farm crisis of the 1980 seconds by diversifying crops and managing debt carefully enough to survive when thousands of other farmers lost everything. And I'm the one who's going to end the family legacy because I couldn't adapt fast enough to changing market conditions." James studied the disabled tractor with the focused attention of someone conducting a detailed engineering assessment, his hands moving across components, while his mind clearly worked through complex repair calculations and resource requirements. "You've got a seized engine that needs to be pulled, disassembled, and either repaired or replaced," he said finally. "That normally requires a professional shop, specialized tools, and parts that cost thousands of dollars. But I can do it here in your barn, with basic equipment, salvaged components, and techniques I developed during 23 years of keeping military machinery operational in combat zones where conventional repair wasn't possible." "How long would it take?" Robert asked, trying to calculate whether any timeline for repair would still allow enough planting season to generate a crop that might produce revenue before the bank's foreclosure deadline. 3 days if everything goes right," James replied. 5 days if I encounter complications that require fabricating custom parts or improvising solutions for unexpected damage. Either way, you'll have a functional tractor by the end of the week, which gives you enough time to plant your corn and possibly generate the yield you need to convince the bank that this operation is still viable." The offer represented hope that Robert had abandoned weeks ago, but accepting help from a homeless stranger carried risks that his practical nature couldn't completely ignore, even in desperate circumstances that left few alternatives worth considering. "Why would you do this?" he asked directly. "You don't know me, you've got no connection to this farm, and you're offering to invest days of intensive labor without any guaranteed compensation beyond basic hospitality. James met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had made peace with personal choices that others might not understand or approve. Because I spent 23 years serving this country in uniform, believing that I was protecting the American values and way of life that made this nation worth defending, he said quietly. Then I came home to discover that the country I'd served had systematically abandoned its veterans while allowing corporate interests to destroy the family farms and small businesses that once formed the backbone of American economic independence and community stability. I can't fix the whole broken system, but I can help one farmer save one family legacy, and that's worth more to me than whatever else I might do with the next few days of my life. The raw honesty in James's voice carried conviction that Robert recognized as authentic, the kind of fundamental integrity that couldn't be faked or performed for manipulative purposes. "All right," he said finally, "you fix my tractor. I'll feed you and give you a place to sleep. Beyond that, we'll see what happens." James nodded once, already turning back to examine the disabled machine with the focused intensity of someone beginning a complex engineering project that would require every bit of his accumulated technical expertise and improvised problem-solving capabilities. "I'll need your barn, whatever tools you've got, and access to any salvage equipment or parts you might have lying around the property. Everything else I can figure out as I go." Robert led the homeless veteran toward the large red barn that had stood on the property for 80 years, its interior filled with decades of accumulated farming equipment, spare parts, and mechanical components that represented generations of agricultural operation and maintenance activities. The space smelled of motor oil, old hay, and the particular combination of rust and grease that characterized every working farm building in rural America, its familiar scents triggering memories of childhood hours spent watching his father and grandfather perform the maintenance work that kept their operation functional through decades of continuous agricultural production. James moved through the barn with obvious appreciation for the accumulated resources and equipment that represented opportunities for salvaging components and fabricating solutions that conventional mechanics would never consider or attempt. His hands moved across old engine blocks, transmission housings, and hydraulic components with the confident assessment of someone who understood how mechanical systems could be adapted and repurposed beyond their original design specifications. "You've got enough spare parts here to build 3 tractors," James observed. "Most of it is obsolete by modern standards, but that doesn't mean it's useless for someone who understands how to adapt components across different equipment generations and manufacturers. I can work with this." Robert watched the homeless veteran begin organizing tools and parts with military precision, creating workstations and staging areas that suggested extensive experience managing complex repair projects under challenging conditions, where organization and efficiency determined success or failure. The transformation from desperate, impossible situation to potentially viable repair project happened so quickly that Robert struggled to fully process the emotional shift from resignation to cautious hope. Sarah appeared in the barn doorway an hour later, her nurse's uniform suggesting she was between hospital shifts, her face showing the exhaustion of someone working 60-hour weeks while watching her family's security crumble, despite every effort to generate additional income. "Robert," she called quietly, "who's the man taking apart our tractor engine?" "His name is James," Robert replied. "He's a homeless veteran who claims he can repair the tractor in less than a week. I know it sounds crazy, but he knows what he's doing, and we don't have any better options." Sarah studied James with the clinical assessment of someone trained to evaluate people quickly and accurately, her eyes taking in the worn clothing, weathered features, and confident mechanical work that suggested capabilities far beyond his current circumstances. "What's he want in return?" she asked carefully. "Food and shelter," Robert answered. "Nothing else. He says he wants to help preserve our family farm because it represents something worth saving." His wife's expression softened slightly. though worry remained evident in the tension around her eyes and the way her hands gripped her car keys as though they represented one of the few things in her life she could still control. "Be careful," she said quietly. "I know we're desperate, but that doesn't mean we should trust everyone who offers help." "I know," Robert replied, "but right now, trust is the only currency I've got left to spend." James worked through the first night with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he found purpose in mechanical challenges that most people would consider impossible. Robert checked on him twice after midnight, finding the veteran covered in grease and engine oil, his hands moving with surgical precision as he disassembled the tractor's seized power plant using tools and techniques that seemed to defy conventional repair wisdom. The barn's single overhead light created harsh shadows that emphasized the concentration on James's weathered face, his movements deliberate and economical in ways that spoke to years of working under pressure, where wasted motion could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. By dawn, the engine block sat completely disassembled on a workbench. James had improvised from sawhorses and plywood, its internal damage laid bare for detailed assessment. Robert brought coffee and breakfast as morning light filtered through the barn's dusty windows, studying the scattered components that represented either salvation or confirmation that his situation was truly hopeless beyond any possibility of recovery. "It's worse than I thought," James said quietly, pointing to the cracked cylinder block and damaged pistons. "You've got fractures in 3 cylinders, scored cylinder walls, and bearing damage throughout the crankshaft assembly. A conventional shop would tell you this engine is scrap metal, recommend a complete replacement, and charge you $15,000 for parts and labor." Robert felt his brief hope collapse back into familiar despair, the mathematical certainty of his farm's destruction reasserting itself with the weight of technical reality that no amount of determination could overcome. "So, it can't be fixed," he said flatly. "I didn't say that," James replied, his eyes still moving across the damaged components with the assessment of someone searching for solutions rather than confirming problems. "I said a conventional shop wouldn't fix it. I've spent 2 decades making impossible repairs work because failure wasn't an option and replacement parts didn't exist in the middle of combat zones where improvisation was the only alternative to mission failure and dead soldiers." The veteran's hands moved to a pile of salvaged equipment Robert had accumulated over years of farming, pulling components from obsolete tractors and machinery that had seemed worthless, until James began explaining how parts from different manufacturers and equipment generations could be adapted and integrated through custom fabrication and precision machining that conventional mechanics would never attempt or consider viable. "You've got a cylinder block from a 1970 seconds international harvester that's compatible with your John Deere if I bore out the mounting points and fabricate custom adapter plates," James explained, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had solved similar problems countless times before. "The pistons from that old case tractor can be modified to fit your specifications if I machine them down and customize the ring grooves. Your crankshaft can be salvaged if I weld the damaged bearing surfaces and then precision grind them back to factory tolerances using techniques I developed for repairing armored vehicle drivetrains in Iraqi maintenance facilities." Robert listened to the technical explanation with growing amazement, struggling to comprehend how someone could possess this level of mechanical expertise while living homeless and traveling on foot through rural Nebraska looking for temporary work and basic hospitality. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. James's hands continued working as he spoke, already beginning the process of preparing salvaged components for custom modification and precision adaptation. 23 years in the Army Corps of Engineers," he said. "Started as a basic mechanic, got selected for advanced technical training, spent 15 years deployed to combat zones where keeping equipment operational meant solving problems that engineering manuals said couldn't be solved. I've rebuilt tank engines using parts from destroyed vehicles, fabricated replacement components from raw metal stock using portable machine tools, and maintained critical infrastructure under conditions that would shut down any civilian repair facility. The transformation of scattered salvage into potentially viable repair components happened with startling speed, as James employed machining techniques that seemed to blend precision engineering with improvised problem-solving in ways that defied Robert's understanding of how mechanical repair was supposed to work. The veteran used hand tools to perform operations that should have required industrial machinery, his decades of experience enabling him to achieve tolerances and specifications through pure skill and technical knowledge that exceeded what most professional mechanics could accomplish with fully equipped modern shops. Sarah arrived at the barn during her lunch break from the hospital, carrying food and the cautious curiosity of someone trying to understand whether the stranger working on their tractor represented genuine hope or elaborate delusion. She watched James work for several minutes before speaking, her clinical training enabling her to assess his technical competence through observation of his systematic approach and obvious expertise. "You really think you can fix it?" she asked finally. James looked up from the cylinder block he was modifying, his grease-covered hands pausing their precise work. "I know I can fix it," he replied simply. "The question isn't whether it's possible. It's whether I can complete the work fast enough for your husband to plant his corn and generate the revenue you need to convince the bank this farm is still viable." Sarah's nurse instincts apparently recognized authenticity when she saw it, because her defensive posture softened slightly as she set down the food she had brought. "Robert says you're doing this just for meals and a place to sleep," she said carefully. "That doesn't make sense. This is skilled labor worth hundreds of dollars per hour." "Money isn't the only currency that matters," James replied, returning his attention to the precision work that required absolute focus and steady hands. "I spent 23 years serving a country that forgot about its veterans the moment we came home. Corporate interests destroyed the small businesses and family farms that used to provide economic independence and community stability. I can't fix the whole broken system, but I can help one family keep their legacy, and that's worth more than whatever cash payment you might scrape together from money you don't have." The raw honesty in his voice carried weight that couldn't be dismissed or questioned, the kind of fundamental integrity that Sarah's professional experience had taught her to recognize as genuine. Robert saw his wife's shoulders relax slightly, the constant tension she had carried for months, easing just enough to suggest that maybe, possibly, they weren't completely alone in fighting an impossible battle against forces designed to destroy everything they had built. The next 2 days blurred into a continuous cycle of mechanical work, improvised problem-solving, and the kind of focused intensity that transformed James from homeless stranger into essential partner in the desperate effort to save the Sullivan farm from foreclosure. Robert worked alongside the veteran, learning techniques and approaches to mechanical repair that seemed to exist outside conventional training or standard procedures, watching someone who possessed capabilities that defied his current circumstances. James's hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades solving problems under pressure, his technical expertise enabling repairs that conventional mechanics would have declared impossible. He welded cracked metal with precision that created bonds stronger than original factory specifications, machined components to tolerances that matched industrial equipment using only hand tools and improvised jigs, and fabricated custom parts that integrated salvaged equipment across different manufacturers and equipment generations through pure technical knowledge and mechanical intuition. The third evening brought unexpected complications when Robert's older brother Daniel arrived at the farm unannounced, his expensive truck and designer clothes marking the economic distance that had grown between siblings who had once shared childhood dreams of farming the family land together. Daniel had left for college 20 years earlier, built a successful financial consulting career in Omaha, and maintained only minimal contact with the family farm that represented responsibilities he had chosen to escape rather than share. "I heard you're about to lose the place," Daniel said, his tone mixing concern with judgment in ways that immediately set Robert's teeth on edge. "Mom's neighbor called me, said the bank is foreclosing and you've got some homeless guy living in the barn working on the tractor." Robert felt defensive anger rise at his brother's sudden appearance and implicit criticism, the old resentments and unresolved conflicts from 2 decades of divergent life choices surfacing with familiar bitterness. "James is helping me repair equipment so I can plant the corn crop that might generate enough revenue to save this farm," he replied tightly. "Where were you 3 months ago when I was trying to figure out how to keep making loan payments? Where were you last year when commodity prices collapsed and I was deciding which bills to pay and which to let slide?" Daniel's expression hardened into the superior condescension that had characterized their relationship since he left for college and discovered that success in corporate America could be measured in ways that made farming seem primitive and economically irrational. "I was building a career and making money instead of clinging to romantic notions about family legacy and agricultural tradition," he said bluntly. "Dad spent 50 years breaking his back on this land and died with more debt than assets. Grandpa worked himself into an early grave trying to prove that stubborn determination could overcome economic reality. And now you're doing the exact same thing, sacrificing your family's financial security because you're too proud or too stupid to admit that small-scale farming is economically obsolete." The words hit Robert like physical blows, articulating fears and doubts that he had been fighting to suppress for years while watching his operation spiral toward bankruptcy despite every effort to adapt and survive. "This land has been in our family for 100 years, he said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "Great-grandpa homesteaded it during the Depression, survived the Dust Bowl when half the county gave up and moved away. Grandpa expanded the operation after the war, proved that family farms could compete with corporate agriculture if they managed resources carefully and maintained soil quality. Dad weathered the farm crisis of the 80s when thousands of farmers lost everything. And you think I should just surrender because the current economic situation makes things difficult? Difficult?" Daniel's laugh carried bitter amusement. "Robert, you're 3 months behind on loan payments. You've got $60,000 due in 2 weeks. And your only hope is getting a homeless veteran's improvised tractor repair to work long enough to plant a corn crop that might produce enough revenue to convince the bank to restructure debt they've already written off as uncollectible. That's not difficult, that's delusional." James emerged from the barn at that moment, his grease-covered appearance and obvious homeless status apparently confirming every negative assumption Daniel had made about Robert's situation and judgment. The veteran's eyes moved between the brothers with the tactical assessment of someone trained to evaluate conflict situations and potential threats, his body language shifting into the ready awareness that suggested military experience reading dangerous social dynamics. "You must be the brother who left," James observed quietly. "The one who chose financial success over family obligation, built a comfortable life in the city, and now shows up to criticize choices you weren't here to share or support." Daniel's face flushed with anger at being so accurately assessed by someone he clearly viewed as beneath his social status and unqualified to judge his life decisions. "Who the hell are you to lecture me about family obligation?" he demanded. "You're a homeless drifter who's taking advantage of my brother's desperation by pretending you can fix problems that require professional solutions and real money. I'm a combat veteran with 23 years of military service," James replied, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious insult. "I've kept critical equipment operational under conditions that would break most civilian mechanics. I've saved lives by solving problems that engineering manuals said were impossible. And I'm helping your brother preserve a family legacy that you abandoned because maintaining it required more courage and commitment than you possessed." The confrontation escalated with shocking speed as Daniel took an aggressive step toward James, his corporate confidence apparently convincing him that physical intimidation would work against someone whose weathered appearance suggested vulnerability. Robert moved to intercept his brother, but James remained perfectly still, his body language shifting into the controlled readiness of someone with extensive combat training, who understood exactly how dangerous situations could become if not properly managed. "Daniel, stop," Robert said sharply. "James is helping us when nobody else would. You don't get to show up after years of absence and start attacking the one person who's actually trying to save this farm." His brother's anger seemed to encompass everything about the situation: the farm's financial crisis, Robert's stubborn determination to save an operation that Daniel viewed as economically hopeless, the homeless veteran whose presence represented everything that offended his sense of proper social order and rational decision-making. "I came here to make you a reasonable offer," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I've been talking with agricultural investment groups in Omaha. They're willing to buy this property for $700,000, enough to pay off all your debts and give you a fresh start somewhere else, doing something that doesn't involve destroying your family's financial security through stubborn attachment to obsolete agricultural traditions." The number hit Robert like a physical shock, representing more money than he had ever imagined possessing, enough to eliminate every debt and provide financial security that farming could never guarantee. But accepting it meant surrendering the land his great-grandfather had homesteaded, betraying the legacy his grandfather and father had preserved through their own periods of agricultural crisis, admitting that his generation was too weak or incompetent to maintain what previous generations had protected through greater challenges and harder times. "That land is worth twice what they're offering," James observed quietly. "Corporate agricultural operations are systematically undervaluing family farmland, acquiring it at below-market prices from desperate owners who don't have alternatives, then consolidating it into industrial operations that strip mine soil productivity for short-term profits, while destroying the careful stewardship that family farmers maintained for generations." Daniel turned his fury on the veteran with venomous intensity. "Nobody asked for your opinion," he snapped. "You're a homeless nobody who's living in my family's barn because my brother is too desperate to recognize a con artist when he sees one." "Your family's barn?" James's voice remained calm, but Robert heard the steel beneath the measured tone. "You gave up any claim to this property when you left 20 years ago. You built your comfortable life by abandoning the responsibilities that your brother has carried alone, while you criticized his choices from the safety of your corporate office. You don't get to show up now and pretend you have authority over decisions that affect land you walked away from." Sarah appeared from the house at that moment, apparently drawn by the sound of raised voices, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting an impossible battle for too long. "Daniel," she said quietly, "if you're here to help, we appreciate it. If you're here to criticize and undermine, then please leave. We don't have the energy for family drama right now." Robert's brother seemed to struggle with conflicting emotions, his anger battling against whatever concern had actually motivated his unexpected visit. "I'm trying to help," he said finally. "I'm trying to save you from making the same mistakes that destroyed Dad's health and Grandpa's life. From sacrificing everything for land that doesn't care how hard you work or how much you sacrifice. The land isn't what destroys people," James said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "It's the systems built by people like your corporate investment groups, designed to transfer wealth from families to corporations, to eliminate independent operators who can't compete with economies of scale and access to unlimited capital. Your brother isn't failing because he's incompetent. He's failing because the entire agricultural economy is structured to destroy operations like his." The truth in James's words seemed to penetrate even Daniel's defensive anger, creating a moment of uncomfortable silence where Robert saw his brother truly considering perspectives that challenged the worldview that had justified his life choices for 2 decades. The tension hung heavy in the evening air, mixing with the smell of freshly turned soil and distant rain that threatened to further delay planting if Robert couldn't get the tractor operational within the next few days. "I need to think," Daniel said finally, his corporate confidence visibly shaken by confrontations that had challenged assumptions he had built his entire adult identity around. "I'll be at Mum's place if you want to talk." He walked to his truck without looking back, leaving Robert standing between his wife and the homeless veteran who had somehow become the most reliable person in his current crisis. Sarah moved to Robert's side, her hand finding his with the familiar comfort of shared struggle and mutual support that had sustained their marriage through 3 years of escalating financial disaster. "Do you trust him?" she asked quietly, gesturing toward James. Robert watched the veteran return to the barn, where the partially reassembled tractor represented either salvation or final confirmation that his family's 100-year legacy would end during his stewardship. "I trust that he knows what he's doing mechanically," Robert replied. "Beyond that, I don't know. But right now, trust is the only thing I can afford to give." The 4th day brought breakthrough progress as James completed the final assembly of the rebuilt engine, his improvised repairs and custom fabrications transforming scattered salvage into a functional power plant that defied conventional mechanical wisdom. Robert watched the veteran perform final adjustments with the precision of someone who had spent decades ensuring that critical equipment would perform under extreme conditions where failure could cost lives. "Start her up," James said finally, stepping back from the tractor with the cautious confidence of someone who knew his work was solid but understood that mechanical systems could still produce unexpected failures despite perfect preparation and expert execution. Robert climbed into the tractor's cab with hands that trembled from exhaustion and tension, his mind refusing to fully believe that 4 days of desperate improvised repair could actually succeed where professional solutions had seemed financially impossible. He turned the key, heard the starter motor engage, felt the entire machine shudder as the rebuilt engine caught and roared to life with a sound that represented salvation and vindication and hope that had seemed permanently dead just days earlier. The engine ran smooth and strong, its rebuilt components performing exactly as James had promised. The homeless veteran's impossible repair, transforming Robert's situation from certain foreclosure to genuine possibility that maybe, somehow, he could still save his family's legacy through one last, desperate farming season. Sarah emerged from the house at a run, her face showing the first genuine smile Robert had seen in months as she recognized the sound of the running tractor and understood what it meant for their family's survival. James stood beside the machine with quiet satisfaction, his weathered face showing the kind of deep contentment that came from using hard-earned skills to accomplish something that mattered beyond simple mechanical function. "How long will it last?" Robert asked, afraid to trust what seemed too good to be true. "It'll run as long as you maintain it properly," James replied. "The repairs I made are solid. The components I adapted are actually stronger than original factory specifications because I built them to military durability standards. You've got a functional tractor that will plant your corn and harvest whatever crop you produce." Robert wanted to express gratitude that exceeded simple words, to somehow convey what this impossible repair meant for his family and their legacy, but his throat tightened with emotion that made speech difficult. James seemed to understand, his slight nod, acknowledging everything that didn't need to be spoken between two men who had both spent their lives fighting battles against forces that didn't care about individual courage or determination. "Plant your corn," James said quietly. "Save your farm. That's all the thanks I need." Robert planted corn for 18 straight hours, running the repaired tractor through fields that had sat empty for weeks while financial crisis consumed his family's future. The machine performed flawlessly, James's impossible repairs holding strong through the kind of sustained operation that would have tested factory-new equipment. Sarah brought meals to the field at dawn and dusk, her presence a silent testimony to shared determination that had sustained their marriage through years of struggle that would have destroyed weaker partnerships built on less fundamental trust and mutual commitment. James spent those days organizing the barn with military precision, creating maintenance systems and repair protocols that would enable Robert to keep his equipment operational without professional assistance that his financial situation couldn't support. The veteran worked with quiet efficiency, his actions demonstrating the kind of practical knowledge that came from decades of maintaining critical machinery under conditions where failure meant catastrophic consequences beyond simple mechanical breakdown. On the evening of the fifth day, as Robert completed the final acres of corn planting and returned the tractor to the barn, he found James packing his worn backpack with the methodical preparation of someone accustomed to constant movement and temporary shelter. The realization that the veteran was leaving hit Robert with unexpected emotional force. The recognition that this homeless stranger had become someone whose presence represented more than simple mechanical expertise or temporary assistance. "You're going," Robert said, the statement emerging as acknowledgement rather than question. James nodded, his weathered hands continuing their efficient packing. "You don't need me anymore," he replied. "Your tractor is running, your corn is planted, and you've got maintenance protocols that will keep your equipment operational through harvest season. The rest is up to you, and whatever cooperation you can negotiate with the bank." "Stay," Robert said impulsively, "at least through harvest. I can't pay much, but you'd have regular meals, a real bed, and steady work that uses your skills instead of wandering through Nebraska looking for temporary opportunities." The veteran's expression softened with what might have been regret or perhaps recognition of temptation that couldn't be accepted for reasons Robert didn't fully understand. "I appreciate the offer," James said quietly, "but I'm not built for staying in one place anymore. 23 years of military service taught me how to be useful during crises, how to solve impossible problems, and move on before people start depending on me for things I can't provide long term. You've got your farm back, your family intact, and a fighting chance to preserve your legacy. That's what I came to help with, and that job is done." Sarah appeared in the barn doorway, carrying an envelope that Robert recognized as containing the $473 that had represented their entire available cash just days earlier. "Please take this," she said, offering the money to James. "It's not nearly enough for what you've done, but it's all we have right now." James shook his head firmly, refusing to accept payment that he had explicitly declined from the beginning of his involvement with their crisis. "Keep your money," he said. "You're going to need every dollar to maintain operations until harvest generates revenue. What I did wasn't about payment. It was about preserving something worth saving in a country that's systematically destroying the family farms and small businesses that used to provide economic independence and community stability." "Then at least let us give you supplies," Robert insisted. "Food, better clothes, camping gear that will make traveling less brutal. You've earned that much and more through what you've done for us." The veteran considered the offer for a long moment before nodding acceptance. "I won't refuse practical help," he said finally. "But understand that I didn't do this expecting compensation or creating obligation. I helped because it was the right thing to do and because your family represents values worth protecting, even when the broader economic system is designed to destroy them." They spent the next hour assembling supplies that would ease James's continued travels through rural Nebraska: a quality sleeping bag, weatherproof clothing, non-perishable food, and basic camping equipment that Robert had accumulated over years of farming but rarely used anymore. Sarah added first aid supplies with the clinical efficiency of someone whose nursing training recognized the healthcare challenges that homeless populations faced without access to regular medical services. Daniel returned to the farm that evening, his expensive truck announcing his arrival before he appeared at the barn entrance. Robert's brother looked different somehow. his corporate confidence replaced by something that resembled genuine uncertainty about assumptions he had built his adult identity around. "I talked to Mum," Daniel said quietly. "She's been asking about the farm, worried about what's happening, even though her dementia makes it hard for her to retain information or understand the financial situation." "What did you tell her?" Robert asked, surprised that his brother had visited their mother rather than returning directly to Omaha and his comfortable corporate life. "I told her you saved the farm," Daniel replied, his eyes moving to James with something that might have been grudging respect. "I told her that against impossible odds, and with help from an unexpected source, you managed to preserve the legacy that Dad and Grandpa protected through their own crises and challenges." James continued packing with the same methodical efficiency, apparently unconcerned with family dynamics that didn't directly involve him. But Robert saw the slight pause in the veterans' movements, the subtle acknowledgement that he was listening to a conversation that revealed deeper family complexities than their initial confrontation had suggested. "The investment group is still interested in buying the property," Daniel continued. "They've actually increased their offer to $800,000 after I explained the farm's agricultural history and soil quality. That's enough money to clear all your debts, set up trust funds for the kids' education, and give you financial security that farming can never guarantee." Robert felt the familiar temptation of escape from endless struggle, the seductive promise of financial stability that would eliminate the constant stress that had been destroying his health and straining his marriage for 3 years. But accepting it meant betraying everything his ancestors had preserved, admitting that his generation was too weak to maintain what previous generations had protected through depression, Dust Bowl, and every agricultural crisis of the past century. "I'm not selling," Robert said, the words emerging with certainty that surprised him. "Not to corporate operations that will strip mine the soil productivity my family has built over 4 generations. Not to investment groups that view agricultural land as commodity assets rather than living ecosystems that require careful stewardship. This farm stays in the family or it doesn't survive at all, and I'm going to do everything possible to ensure it survives." Daniel's expression showed conflict between his corporate worldview and something deeper that his comfortable urban life had tried to suppress or ignore. "Dad died at 67 from a heart attack brought on by decades of physical labor and financial stress," he said quietly. "Grandpa worked himself into an early grave, trying to prove that determination could overcome economic forces designed to destroy small farms. You're following the exact same path, sacrificing your health and your family's security for land that doesn't care how hard you work or how much you sacrifice." "The land does care," James said unexpectedly, his voice carrying conviction that silenced both brothers. "Not in ways that quarterly profit reports measure or corporate balance sheets recognize, but in the fundamental relationship between careful stewardship and long-term productivity that industrial agriculture deliberately ignores in favor of short-term extraction. Your brother isn't destroying his health through stubbornness. He's fulfilling obligations that your generation walked away from when rural life seemed too hard and urban careers offered easier paths to material success." The harsh accuracy of James's assessment hit Daniel with visible force, articulating truths that challenged justifications he had spent 20 years constructing around his life choices. "I didn't abandon the farm," he said defensively. "I made rational economic decisions about career paths and lifestyle preferences that happened to lead away from agricultural work." "You abandoned your brother," James replied bluntly. "You left him to carry responsibilities that should have been shared, to fight battles alone that required family unity and mutual support. You built comfortable life in the city, while he struggled to preserve a legacy that benefited from his sacrifice without providing the recognition or support that his commitment deserved." Robert saw his brother's face flush with anger and shame, the complex emotions of someone confronting uncomfortable truths about choices that couldn't be unmade or easily justified through rational economic analysis. "I sent money," Daniel said, his voice defensive. I helped with loan payments during the worst years, contributed to equipment repairs and operational costs when cash flow problems threatened immediate crisis. You sent guilt payments, James observed with the blunt honesty of someone who had no stake in family politics or personal feelings to protect. You tried to substitute money for presence, to compensate for abandonment through financial contributions that eased your conscience without requiring you to share the actual burdens that your brother carried alone. The veteran's words created heavy silence in the barn, the truth of his assessment impossible to deny or deflect through conventional rationalizations. Robert watched his brother struggle with emotions that professional success and corporate confidence hadn't prepared him to process or manage effectively. "I can't change the past 20 years," Daniel said finally. "I can't undo the choices I made or the responsibilities I avoided. But I can try to help now, even if my help comes in forms you don't particularly want or appreciate." Sarah, who had been watching the confrontation with her nurse's clinical detachment, spoke for the first time. "Robert doesn't need your money or your corporate connections," she said quietly. "What he needs is family who supports his choices, instead of constantly questioning his judgment and suggesting that his commitment to preserving our legacy represents some kind of irrational stubbornness rather than courage and integrity." Daniel looked at his sister-in-law with obvious surprise, apparently unaccustomed to direct challenge from someone whose quiet presence he had probably dismissed as passive acceptance of his brother's decisions. "I'm trying to protect you from financial disaster," he said. "I'm trying to prevent you from losing everything the same way Dad lost his health and Grandpa lost years of his life to endless agricultural struggle. We'd rather risk financial disaster while fighting for something meaningful than accept guaranteed security purchased through surrender of everything our family has built." Sarah replied, her voice carrying steel that matched her husband's determination. "You made your choice 20 years ago. This is ours." James shouldered his backpack with the finality of someone ending his involvement in family dynamics that would continue long after his departure. "Your corn is planted, your equipment is functional, and your family is united in their commitment to preserving their legacy," he said. "That's everything I came to help with. The rest is up to you, and whatever courage you can maintain when the next crisis comes, because it will come, and you'll face it the same way your ancestors did, with determination and mutual support and refusal to surrender what matters most." "Where will you go?" Robert asked, recognizing that he would probably never see this man again despite the profound impact he had made on their family's future. "West," James replied, with the vague certainty of someone whose travel plans existed more as general direction than specific destination. "Maybe Colorado, maybe Wyoming. Wherever small farmers and family operations might need help that conventional systems won't provide or support." Robert walked James to the county road that bordered the farm's eastern edge, Sarah accompanying them in silent recognition that this departure represented something more significant than simple goodbye to temporary help. The evening sun painted the planted fields in golden light that emphasized the rich soil and careful conservation that 4 generations of Sullivans had maintained through conscious stewardship and environmental responsibility. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate," Robert said as they reached the road. James extended his weathered hand one final time, his grip firm with the calluses of someone who had spent a lifetime doing work that mattered, even when systems and institutions failed to recognize or compensate the value it created. "Preserve your land," he said simply. "Honor your ancestors by maintaining what they built. That's all the thanks I need or want." They watched the veteran walk away along the county road, his steady pace covering ground with the efficient movement of someone accustomed to long-distance travel on foot. Robert felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her presence anchoring him against emotions that threatened to overwhelm, practiced stoicism and rural reserve. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Robert admitted, "but I know we're going to try with everything we have, and that has to be enough." The next morning brought unexpected visitors as 3 black SUVs appeared on the farm's main driveway, their official government plates and professional occupants suggesting federal business that filled Robert with immediate anxiety about what new crisis might be emerging to threaten his fragile security. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI emerged from the lead vehicle, her credentials and serious expression indicating official business that transcended local jurisdiction. "Mr. Sullivan," she said formally, "we're looking for a James Mitchell who was reported staying on your property. We have some questions we need to ask him regarding his military service and current activities." Robert felt protective instinct override his natural deference to federal authority. "James left yesterday," he said carefully. "He helped repair my tractor and then continued traveling. I don't know where he went." Agent Martinez exchanged glances with her colleagues before pulling out a photograph that showed a younger version of James in military dress uniform, his chest decorated with medals that Robert recognized as representing extraordinary service and uncommon valor. "Did he mention anything about his military background?" she asked. "He said he spent 23 years as a combat engineer," Robert replied, confused about why federal agents would be tracking a homeless veteran who had done nothing except help save a struggling family farm. He used those skills to repair equipment that professional mechanics said was beyond salvage. The agent's expression shifted into something that might have been respect mixed with concern. "James Mitchell is a highly decorated combat veteran who disappeared from VA support systems 3 years ago," she explained. "He's not wanted for any crime, but we've been trying to locate him because he's entitled to significant benefits and recognition that he's apparently been avoiding or refusing to accept." Sarah emerged from the house, her nurse's instincts apparently recognizing official business that might affect their family. "What kind of benefits?" she asked directly. Agent Martinez consulted notes before responding. "Full disability compensation for service-connected injuries, comprehensive medical care through VA facilities, and housing assistance that would provide permanent shelter instead of homeless traveling. He's also scheduled to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom next month for his military service and contributions to combat engineering that saved thousands of American lives during his deployments." The revelation that James had been avoiding benefits and recognition he had clearly earned through extraordinary service created new understanding about the veteran's motivations and choices. Robert realized that the homeless stranger who had saved his farm had been running from acknowledgement and support systems rather than seeking them, pursuing some personal mission that valued helping individual families over accepting institutional recognition. "He said he was heading west," Robert offered, "Colorado or Wyoming, looking for other family farms that might need help that conventional systems won't provide." The federal agents exchanged significant looks before Agent Martinez spoke again. "If you have contact with him, please encourage him to reach out to VA services. He's earned support that he shouldn't refuse out of whatever pride or principle is motivating his current lifestyle choices." After the federal vehicles departed, Robert and Sarah stood together, looking at the planted fields that represented their family's survival and James's unlikely intervention. "A Presidential Medal of Freedom," Sarah said quietly. "One of the nation's highest honors, and he's traveling homeless through Nebraska, helping struggling farmers instead of accepting recognition he deserves." "Maybe that is his recognition," Robert suggested. "Maybe he found meaning in direct help that institutional systems couldn't provide or replace, even with medals and official ceremonies." The following weeks brought growing corn that pushed through rich soil with the vigor that proper planting timing and careful stewardship had nurtured over generations. Robert monitored the fields with cautious optimism, watching his crops develop with the kind of quality that might actually generate revenue sufficient to convince the bank that his operation deserved continued support rather than foreclosure proceedings. Daniel visited twice more before returning to Omaha, their conversations gradually shifting from confrontation to something approaching mutual understanding, if not complete reconciliation. His brother couldn't fully comprehend Robert's commitment to preserving the family farm, but seemed to recognize that different values and priorities could coexist without requiring one sibling to condemn or dismiss the other's life choices. The bank ultimately agreed to restructure Robert's debt after agricultural extension agents confirmed that his corn crop showed exceptional quality and projected yields that would generate substantial revenue. The loan officers remained skeptical about long-term viability, but federal regulations protecting family farms and political pressure from rural advocacy groups created institutional incentives for providing one more chance to operations that demonstrated genuine commitment to survival. Harvest came in late October, with yields that exceeded even optimistic projections. The combination of careful soil management, proper planting timing, and favorable weather producing corn quality that commanded premium prices in specialty markets. Robert sold his crop for enough revenue to make current loan payments, establish operating capital for the following season, and begin rebuilding financial reserves that had been systematically depleted during 3 years of agricultural crisis. On a cold November evening, 6 weeks after harvest, Robert stood in the same spot where he had first encountered James, beside the disabled tractor that had seemed to represent his family's final failure. The machine sat in the barn now, meticulously maintained according to protocols the veteran had established, ready for another season of service through impossible repairs that continued performing beyond any reasonable expectation. Sarah joined him as darkness settled across fields that would rest through winter before beginning another cycle of planting and growth and harvest that had characterized Sullivan farming for 4 generations. "Do you think he knows we made it?" she asked. "I think he knew we would make it," Robert replied. "I think that's why he helped us when nobody else would, because he saw something worth preserving that our desperation prevented us from recognizing ourselves." Somewhere in the American West, a homeless veteran was probably helping another struggling farmer, using skills and expertise to preserve family legacies that corporate systems were designed to destroy. James Mitchell would likely never accept the Presidential Medal of Freedom or the recognition his military service had earned, choosing instead to find meaning through direct action that couldn't be measured by institutional ceremonies or official acknowledgement. The Sullivan farm would continue operating, its 100-year legacy extended through one more generation by determination, mutual support, and assistance from an unlikely source who had asked nothing except the opportunity to preserve something worth saving. The land would remember what happened that September, when impossible odds had been overcome through improvised solutions and refusal to surrender, the soil itself testifying to human resilience that exceeded any rational calculation of probability or success. Robert's hand found Sarah's in the gathering darkness